The storm came like a thief that night, tearing through the village with claws of wind and teeth of rain. Lightning split the sky, turning darkness into blinding white for just a heartbeat before plunging everything back into shadow. By the swollen river, most villagers huddled inside their homes, doors bolted tight. But one small figure moved through the chaos, a girl in rags, her bare feet slipping on mud. Amara had nothing, no family, no roof, no warm meal waiting. She survived on scraps and the occasional kindness of strangers who pitied her more than they respected her. Tonight, she'd been searching for shelter under the old bridge when she heard it, a weak cry, almost swallowed by the roaring water. There, half submerged in the flooding river, an old man clung to a broken tree branch. His fingers were pale, his body limp. Amara didn't think. She plunged into the icy water, fighting the current that tried to drag her under. Her small hands gripped his soaked shirt, pulling with strength she didn't know she had. From a dry doorway across the square, Helena, the merchant's daughter, watched with cold eyes. Her silk dress stayed perfectly dry, her lips curled into a sneer. "Look at her," Helena whispered to her maid, always trying to be a hero, always wanting attention. Amara dragged the old man onto the muddy bank, gasping for air. Then his chest stopped moving. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. The old man's face was grey, his lips blue. Water pooled beneath him. She pressed her ear to his chest. Nothing. Around them, a few villagers had emerged, drawn by the commotion. They stood at a safe distance, whispering behind their hands, but offering no help. "He's already dead," someone muttered. "The river took him." But Amara wouldn't accept it. She remembered once seeing a fisherman revive his son after a drowning. She pushed on the old man's chest, counting like she'd seen, then breathed air into his cold mouth. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Her own body shook from cold and exhaustion. She had no strength left, but she tried again anyway. From her pocket, she pulled out her last piece of bread, hard and small, saved for tomorrow's breakfast. She set it beside the old man's head. Maybe if he woke, he'd need it more than she did. Then she removed her only shawl, the thin cloth that kept the worst of the cold away at night, and wrapped it around his soaking body. "Please," she whispered to the storm, to the river, to anyone listening, "please let him live." The villagers shook their heads. Foolish girl, wasting her last possessions on a dying stranger. Then the old man's chest jerked, his mouth opened, he gasped, a desperate, beautiful sound. Air filled his lungs. The storm ended as suddenly as it began. The wind died, the rain stopped. Even the furious river seemed to exhale and go still, its surface smoothing like dark glass. The silence felt unnatural. Amara sat back on her heels, trembling with relief and cold. The old man breathed, shallow but steady. His eyes remained closed, but color slowly returned to his cheeks. Around them, the villagers murmured uneasily. Old grandmother Yemi, who remembered stories from before the village was built, stepped forward. Her cane tapped against wet stones. "The river is listening," she said, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "It always does. It sees what we do when no one watches. It remembers." Some villagers made protective signs with their fingers. Others laughed nervously, calling her superstitious. But Amara felt it too. A strange awareness, as if the water itself had been watching her struggle to save this stranger, as if her actions had been recorded somewhere deeper than memory. She looked down at the old man. In the moonlight breaking through clouds, his face seemed both ancient and ageless. There was something about him that didn't match his torn clothes and dirty hands. From the shadows near the merchant's house, Helena stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Amara with an expression that burned colder than the night air. Jealousy, pure and venomous. Without a sound, she began walking towards them, her fine shoes somehow staying clean despite the mud. 3 days passed. Amara tended to the old man in the ruins of an abandoned mill where she sometimes slept. She brought him water from the well and shared the little food she could beg or find. He recovered slowly, but strangely. His body grew stronger, but he spoke little. When he did, his words carried weight that made Amara pause. "Why do people hurt each other?" he asked one morning, his voice clearer than it should be for someone nearly drowned. "I don't know," Amara answered honestly. "Maybe they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of not having enough, of being nothing." The old man nodded slowly, his eyes sharp and clear despite his weathered face, scanning the village through the broken mill window. He watched the way the merchant conducted business in the square, counting coins with quick fingers. He observed how people bowed to wealth but stepped over the poor. His gaze lingered on everything with an intensity that made Amara uncomfortable. It was the look of someone taking inventory, measuring worth, counting debts owed and paid. "You gave me your bread," he said suddenly, "your only covering. Why?" Amara shrugged. "You needed it more." "But what if I had nothing to give you in return? What if I am exactly what I appear, a worthless old beggar who will die soon anyway?" The question hung in the dusty air between them. Amara met his eyes steadily. "Then you'd still deserve to live. Worth is not measured in gold." The old man's expression shifted, something like surprise or perhaps recognition. "Would you still help me?" he pressed, even then. "Yes." Helena stood in her father's shop, surrounded by boats of fine cloth and jars of expensive spices. Her father, Marcos, the merchant, counted the day's earnings with satisfaction. "That homeless girl," Helena said carefully, "the one who pulled the old beggar from the river, have you noticed how much attention she's getting?" Marcos barely looked up. "Attention doesn't buy bread." "But people are talking about her kindness, about her pure heart." Helena's voice dripped with poison disguised as honey. "They're saying she's better than those of us with actual virtue and breeding." Now Marcos paused, his merchant's mind seeing opportunity. "What are you suggesting?" Helena leaned closer. "I saw something the night of the storm. When she pulled that old man out, I think she took something from his pocket, a small bag. She moved so quickly, but I saw it." It was a lie, born fully formed from jealousy's womb. Marcos stroked his beard. "Are you certain?" "Completely, father. She's been hiding him away, keeping him from proper care. What if she's robbing him while he's weak?" The lie felt so real when she spoke it that Helena almost believed it herself. By evening, whispers crept through the village like smoke under doors. "Have you heard? The homeless girl isn't so pure. She saved him to rob him. Some people will do anything for attention." The lie spread faster than truth ever could. Amara didn't hear the rumors yet. In the quiet of the mill, she and the old man shared a simple meal, watery soup she'd made from vegetables a kind farmer had given her. He ate slowly, gratefully. When finished, he reached into his ragged coat and pulled out something small wrapped in cloth. "Hold out your hand," he said. Amara hesitated, then obeyed. He placed a small wooden carving in her palm, a secular symbol she didn't recognize. 3 rivers flowing into one, with a single star above. It was beautifully made, the wood smooth and warm. "What is this?" she asked. "A reminder," he said, "that what you do in darkness will one day come to light. Keep it close." She turned it over in her fingers, feeling its weight. It seemed too fine a thing for a beggar to own. "Where did you get this?" "From a life you don't know yet," he answered cryptically. Before she could ask more, she heard horses. Through the broken walls, she saw riders, 6 of them, armed and wearing the colors of the Eastern Territories. They moved through the village with purpose, their eyes scanning every face, every doorway. The old man stiffened. For just a moment, his expression shifted from gentle to something harder, older, more dangerous. "Armed riders," Amara whispered. "Should we hide?" "They're not here for you," he quietly said. But his hand trembled as he spoke. The riders stopped in the village square. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, dismounted and addressed the gathering crowd. "We seek a man," he announced, his voice carrying authority. "A land baron who disappeared 3 weeks ago while traveling, Lord Castellan of the River Territories. If anyone has information, there is gold in reward." Amara's breath caught. A land baron. Those were men who controlled vast properties, who held power and wealth beyond imagination. From his shop, Marcos the merchant emerged, his face arranged in concern, but his eyes calculated, always calculating. "How much gold?" Marcos asked. 50 pieces for information leading to his location. The scarred rider's jaw tightened. 50 pieces as stated, no more. "Then perhaps 75 would refresh my memory more clearly," Marcos countered. While they negotiated like vultures over a carcass, Amara noticed something. The old man stood at the mill's broken window, watching. His face was hidden in shadow, but his body was tense. He was listening to every word. One of the riders glanced towards the mill. Amara's heart jumped, but the rider's gaze passed over it, seeing nothing but ruins. After more haggling, Marcos finally spoke. "There was a man pulled from the river during the storm. Homeless girl has him hidden away. Mill on the east side. But I want my gold first." The riders mounted their horses. Amara ran through the forest path, her feet knowing the way even in darkness. She needed guidance. She needed someone who understood things beyond the visible world. Deep in the woods, where the oldest trees grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground, there lived a woman the villagers called the forest elder. Some said she was 100 years old. Some said she was much older. Amara found her sitting by a small fire, as if she'd been expected. "The old man you saved," the elder said before Amara could speak, "is not what he seems. I know. The riders, they are looking for a land baron. They are looking for someone whose wealth makes kingdoms envious, someone who owns everything the river touches." The elder stirred her fire with a crooked stick. "But wealth isn't why he matters." "Then why?" "Because he's testing this village, testing every heart in it. Kindness given when no one watches, when there's no reward in sight, that's the kindness that reveals truth." The elder looked up, her ancient eyes clear as spring water. "Your kindness was given in darkness and storm. It will return to you like thunder, loud and impossible to ignore. But the riders will find what they are meant to find, not before." The elder stood with surprising grace. She walked to where the old man suddenly stood at the edge of the clearing, having arrived without sound. Amara gasped. How had he followed her? He'd been weak just hours ago. The forest elder bowed, a deep, respectful bow that one gives to royalty. The old man nodded in return, a small smile touching his weathered face. Amara walked to grey dawnlight filtering through the mill's broken roof. She reached for the old man's blanket to check on him. It was empty. She sat up quickly, heart racing. "Hello?" Silence. She searched the mill, finding nothing. Outside, she saw footprints in the soft earth, heading not toward the village, but up into the hills, away, gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just absence where presence had been. Amara stood alone, holding only the wooden carving he'd given her. Her chest felt hollow. She'd grown used to his company, to having someone to care for. Now that purpose had vanished like morning mist. She walked slowly back toward the village, her feet heavy. Before she reached the square, she heard the voices. There she is! The thief! A crowd had gathered. Marcos stood at the center, his face arranged in righteous anger. Helena beside him, eyes gleaming with false tears. You! Marcos pointed at Amara. What have you done with him? He left, Amara said simply. He's recovered and gone. Gone? Or dead because you neglected him? Or did you drive him away after robbing him? The crowd murmured. People who'd known Amara her whole life, who'd seen her kindness countless times, now looked at her with suspicion. I didn't, she began. My daughter saw you take something from him the night you pulled him out, Marcos shouted. Everyone knows you've been hiding him, keeping him from proper care. What were you planning? They dragged her to the center of the square, not with actual chains, but with words and accusations that bound just as tightly. She's always been strange, someone said. Probably planned it from the beginning, another added. Using kindness as a disguise, that's the worst kind of thief. Amara stood alone, surrounded by familiar faces turned hostile. The merchant continued his performance, his voice growing louder with each accusation. The law is clear, Marcos declared. "Theft from a helpless person is a serious crime. And what did you take from that poor old man? Show us." "I took nothing," Amara said steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Then what's in your pocket?" Helena pointed, her finger like an arrow. Amara's hand went to the wooden carving. She pulled it out slowly. "He gave me this, a gift." Marcos snatched it from her hand, examining it with greedy eyes. His expression changed, just for a moment, recognition flashing across his face before he hid it. "This," he laughed harshly, "this is evidence of theft. This carving is worth gold, far too valuable for a beggar to own. You stole it." "That's a lie. Your word against mine, girl, and I am a respected merchant." He turned to the crowd. "I call for justice. This girl must be tried properly." The village guard, 2 men who mostly dealt with drunks and petty disputes, stepped forward reluctantly. They knew Amara, had seen her help people countless times, but orders were orders. One of them took her wooden bowl, the only possession she truly owned. "Evidence," he muttered apologetically. They made her stand in the square for hours while villagers passed by. Some spat at her feet, others simply stared with disappointment, as if she'd personally betrayed each one. Children she'd once shared food with now ran past, throwing small stones that stung more in spirit than in flesh. "Thief! Liar! False saint!" Amara kept her eyes down, fighting tears, not because of the words. Words were just air shaped by mouths, but because she'd believed in these people. She'd believed that kindness built bridges, that helping others created bonds stronger than suspicion. She'd been wrong. Even Grandmother Yemi, who spoke of the river's memory, walked by without meeting her eyes. Old friends found reasons to look away. The farmer who'd given her vegetables last week crossed to the other side of the square rather than pass near her. Shame is heaviest when carried alone in a crowd. By evening, Helena stood at her window, watching with satisfaction. This was proper. This was right. The homeless girl would learn her place. Some people were meant to be above, others below. That was the natural order. Then a rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. He carried a banner, the royal seal, golden and unmistakable. Behind him, a carriage approached, flanked by guards. The rider stopped in the square, his horse breathing hard. "By order of the High Court," announced he, "all parties involved in the matter of the river territories are summoned to the capital. You have 3 days to present yourselves." He looked directly at Amara. "Especially you, girl." The village erupted in chaos. The royal seal meant authority beyond question. Defying a summons would bring soldiers, consequences that no one wanted. Marcos paled, but quickly recovered his composure. A summons? Excellent. Now the proper authorities will see justice done. But his hand shook slightly as he folded the official parchment the rider handed him. Helena clutched her father's arm. Why would they care about a simple theft case? "Royal courts deal with property disputes," Marcos said, thinking quickly. "The old man must have been more important than we thought. If someone filed a complaint, no matter, the truth will prevail." The truth. The word sat bitter on his tongue. That night, Amara was locked in the village storage house. Not quite a jail, but close enough. Through the small window, she could see stars. She held the wooden carving. They'd returned it to her as evidence she'd need to present to the court. She traced its 3 rivers flowing into one. What did the old man say? What you do in darkness will one day come to light. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd helped someone because he needed help. If that was a crime, then the world made no sense. But sense or not, she was now involved in something far larger than herself. 3 days later, they traveled to the capital. Amara under guard, Marcos and Helena in a comfortable carriage. Other villagers came too, witnesses Marcos had convinced to testify. The journey took 2 days. When the capital finally appeared on the horizon, Amara's breath caught. Buildings of white stone reached toward the sky, guards in perfect formation, wealth displayed like armor. Marcos smiled, certain of his victory in such a place. The Palace of Justice was terrifying rather than beautiful. Cold marble floors that echoed every footstep. Pillars carved with scenes of judgment and punishment. Everything designed to make ordinary people feel small. Amara walked in chains. Not iron, but the invisible kind made of poverty and powerlessness. The guards treated her gently enough, but she was still a prisoner in everything but name. They entered a great hall where 5 judges sat on an elevated platform, their faces carved from stone and authority. Behind them hung tapestries showing the scales of justice, perfectly balanced. The scales lied. Amara could feel it. In a room like this, the poor were already guilty before speaking a word. Marcus entered with confidence, his finest clothes freshly pressed, Helena beside him playing the role of innocent victim perfectly. Behind them, witnesses from the village, people Marcus had paid or pressured into supporting his story. The matter of theft and deception, announced the head judge, a grey-haired woman whose eyes missed nothing. Marcus, merchant of Riverside Village, brings accusations against Amara, who has no family name, no property, and no standing. No standing. That's what it came down to. In a court of gold, worthlessness was its own verdict. State your case, the judge said to Marcus. He stepped forward, each word rehearsed, each gesture calculated. Your honors, this girl manipulated a vulnerable old man for personal gain. I have witnesses who will testify to her deception. Lies dressed in silk still smelled of rot, but they looked beautiful in this cold golden hall. One by one, the witnesses spoke, each one adding another stone to the wall of lies being built around Amara. I saw him pull something from his pocket, said a farmer who'd borrowed money from Marcus. She kept him hidden, away from proper care, said a shopkeeper who owed Marcus for goods. She always had that calculating look, said a woman who'd never spoken to Amara once in 15 years. The lies stacked like bricks. Each one alone might crumble, but together they built a prison. Helena stood silent through all of it. What could she say against such orchestrated deception? The truth was simple, too simple to compete with such elaborate lies. The head judge leaned forward.
These are serious accusations. Theft from the helpless, deception, manipulation. She looked at Amara with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. Do you have anything to say before we deliberate? This was it. The moment to defend herself. But what defense existed? She had no witnesses who'd speak for her, no evidence but her own word, no standing, no name, no power. The judges began to whisper among themselves. Amara caught fragments. Clear case, obvious guilt, exile seems appropriate. Marcus allowed himself a small, victorious smile. Then, the heavy doors at the back of the hall opened with a sound like thunder. Everyone turned. Into that hall of gold and judgment walked a figure that seemed to pull all light toward itself. At first, Amara didn't recognize him. This man stood straight and strong, his bearing that of someone used to command. He wore simple clothes, but they were clean and well made. His hair, washed and trimmed, showed gray that spoke of wisdom rather than weakness. But the eyes, those sharp, measuring eyes, she knew. The old man from the river. Except he wasn't old anymore. Or rather, he was old, but in the way mountains are old, ancient and unbreakable. The head judge stood abruptly, shock breaking her professional composure. Lord Castellan, you're alive! Marcus's smile died like a candle in wind. The man walked forward with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed in the sudden silence. He passed Marcus without a glance, past Helena, who'd gone pale as death, past the false witnesses who suddenly found the floor fascinating. He stopped before Amara. Are you hurt? He asked gently. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He nodded, then turned to face the judges. When he spoke, it was not the weak voice of a dying beggar. It was the voice of someone who'd commanded armies, ruled territories, shaped the world with decisions. Your honors, he said, allow me to properly introduce myself. He reached up and removed the simple cloak he wore. Beneath it, a medallion hung on a golden chain, the seal of the river territories, the symbol of absolute authority over lands that stretch for 100 miles. I am Lord Castellan, and this trial is mine to conclude. The hall exploded in whispers that the judges quickly silenced, but nothing could silence the shock vibrating through the air. Lord Castellan, the land baron who owned everything the river touched, whose wealth could buy kingdoms, whose word was law in territories that fed half the region. Missing for weeks, presumed dead by some, his disappearance creating chaos in courts and councils. And he'd been lying half drowned in mud while a homeless girl saved his life. Marcus stumbled backward, his mind racing through implications. Helena grabbed her father's arm, terror finally cracking her perfect mask. The head judge recovered first, years of training overriding shock. Lord Castellan, we were told you disappeared. Search parties have been... I know, he interrupted calmly. I ordered them to search, to look for me in every place except where I actually was. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across every face in the hall. I disappeared deliberately. Silence. 3 weeks ago, I removed my fine clothes and put on rags. I walked away from guards and comfort. I wandered until the storm came, until I collapsed by a river in a village I'd never visited. And there, I waited. Waited for what, my lord? Asked the judge. To see what people do when they think no one important is watching. He looked at Amara, and his weathered face softened. To see who helps the helpless, not for reward, but because it's right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a journal, leather-bound and expensive. This trial you're conducting, it was always part of my design. The judges leaned forward, confused. Lord Castellan smiled, and it was not a gentle smile. This trial was a test. For 15 years, Lord Castellan continued, his voice filling the hall like a river filling its banks. I've watched wealth corrupt. I've seen good people become monsters when gold touches their fingers. I've seen families destroy each other for inheritance. He paced slowly, each step measured. I have no children, no direct heirs. My fortune, estimated at over 100 million in gold, lands and holdings, will pass to someone when I die. But to whom? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. So, I devised a test. I would make myself vulnerable, helpless, worthless in appearance. I would see who helped the helpless, who showed kindness when there was nothing to gain, and in that person, I would find the character worthy of inheritance. Marcus made a choking sound. The wealth being discussed was beyond imagination, more than entire families earned in 10 generations. I walked through 5 villages over 3 weeks, Lord Castellan continued, his voice filling the hall like a river filling its banks. I collapsed in streets. I begged for food. I pretended to be sick and weak. Do you know what I found? He turned to face the judges directly. People stepped over me. Some kicked me. Some called guards to remove me. Some threw stones. In 5 villages, not one person helped meaningfully. Not one person gave kindness without expectation. His voice hardened. Until this storm. Until a girl with nothing gave everything. Amara's knees felt weak. The wooden carving in her hand suddenly made sense. The 3 rivers flowing into one. His symbol. His seal. She pulled me from drowning waters at risk to herself. She gave her last bread and only covering. She asked nothing in return. And when I recovered and asked if she'd still help me if I had nothing to give, she said yes. Lord Castellan's eyes swept across Marcus, Helena, and the false witnesses. She passed the test. The rest of you failed it spectacularly. But the test didn't end there, Lord Castellan said, opening his journal. I recovered in secret and watched. I watched what happened when kindness existed without reward. Would the village honor it, or would envy poison it? He read from his notes, his voice clinical now, detached. Day 4 after rescue, Marcus begins spreading rumors. His daughter plants seeds of doubt. By day 6, accusations of theft emerge. False accusations built on nothing but jealousy. Marcus tried to speak, but his throat wouldn't work. Day 7, the girl is publicly shamed. The very people she'd helped turned against her based on lies. Lord Castellan closed his journal. I watched this village, and particularly you, Marcus, choose cruelty over truth. The head judge leaned forward. Lord Castellan, are you saying this entire accusation was fabricated? Completely. I left the village deliberately to see what would happen in my absence. I knew false accusations would follow. I've seen human nature enough times to predict it. The summons to this court, I issued it myself through intermediaries. He smiled coldly. I wanted to see if Marcus would continue his lies even under oath, even in the capital, even when the stakes were raised. This is a royal court, Marcus finally found his voice, though it cracked. You can't toy with justice like this. I'm not toying with justice, Lord Castellan replied softly. I'm enacting it. You accused an innocent girl of theft. You falsified witnesses. You brought those lies to the High Court under oath. He turned to the judges. What is the penalty for perjury in capital courts? The head judge's face was stone. Confiscation of property and exile. And for conspiracy to falsely imprison, the same. The court erupted. Guards moved forward. Marcus backed away, his face red, then white, then red again, as his mind calculated losses he couldn't afford. Wait, he shouted. I have wealth. I can pay fines. I can... Your wealth was built on exploitation, Lord Castellan interrupted. My investigators have been thorough. Bribes to reduce grain prices, deals that cheated farmers, debts called in prematurely to seize property. Should I continue? Marcus closed his mouth. Your Honors, Lord Castellan addressed the judges formally. I submit evidence of 14 separate incidents of fraud, extortion, and manipulation. He handed thick documents to a court clerk. All verified, all documented. The head judge took the papers, scanning quickly. Her expression darkened. These are serious crimes. Marcus, merchant of Riverside Village, you and your household are hereby stripped of property and wealth. All assets are confiscated pending full investigation. No, Helena screamed. Not a delicate scream, but raw and ugly. This isn't fair. We're important. We have standing. That girl is nothing. Lord Castellan's eyes fixed on her with the weight of mountains. That girl has more worth in her smallest finger than your entire bloodline combined. Helena lunged forward. Whether to attack Amara or plead with the judges, no one would ever know. Guards caught her before she'd taken 2 steps. She collapsed, screaming, all beauty and poise shattered into sharp, ugly pieces. It should have been me. I'm worthy. I'm educated. You're eaten alive by envy, Lord Castellan said quietly, the deadliest of all poisons. The guards removed her, her screams echoing down marble halls. Marcus stood alone, broken. Everything he'd built through manipulation and greed was crumbling like sandcastles before tide. The river, Lord Castellan said, and somehow the hall went even quieter, has a long memory. He gestured, and servants brought in a basin of water, crystal clear, drawn from the very river that ran through Riverside Village. In the old days, he continued, judgment came not from human courts, but from nature itself. The guilty were sent back to the source of their crimes to face the consequences directly. The head judge nodded slowly. She was old enough to remember the ancient laws, older even than current legal codes. Poetic justice? Exactly. Lord Castellan turned to Marcus. You will be taken to the river where I nearly drowned. There you will labor for 5 years, helping to strengthen the banks that protect the village from floods. You will do the work of 10 men, the work you should have funded with honest wealth, but chose not to. I'm a merchant, not a laborer, Marcus protested weakly. You were a merchant. Now you're something else. Consider it an education. The judges conferred briefly, then the head judge spoke. This court recognizes the ancient right of restorative justice. Marcus and his daughter Helena will spend 5 years in labor, rebuilding what their greed has damaged. Their property is forfeit. Their names are stripped from all records of honor. Guards stepped forward, not roughly, but firmly. Marcus didn't fight. All fight had drained out of him like water from a broken cup. As they led him away, he looked at Amara one last time. In his eyes was something that might have been understanding. Too late, far too late, but understanding nonetheless. The false witnesses were dealt with quickly. Smaller sentences, but sentences nonetheless. The farmer, the shopkeeper, the gossiping woman, all would spend a year in community service. Then Lord Castellan turned to face Amara. Now, he said gently, we come to the matter of reward. Amara's heart hammered. In the chaos of revelations and justice, she'd almost forgotten that she was at the center of this storm. Lord Castellan approached her, and despite everything, his eyes still held the same gentleness they'd held in the mill when he was just a dying old man. I told you I was testing this village to find someone worthy of inheritance, someone with character beyond corruption. You passed that test. He gestured to the court clerk, who brought forward documents sealed with official stamps. I offer you stewardship of the river territories, the lands, the holdings, the wealth, all of it. Not as ownership to do with as you please, but as guardianship, to manage, to protect, to use wisely. 100 million in gold, more land than Amara could cross in a month of walking, power that could reshape the entire region. The judges leaned forward. The remaining court observers held their breath. Amara looked at the documents, at the seals, at the incredible opportunity being offered. Then she looked at Lord Castellan's face. No, she said quietly. Shock rippled through the hall. Even the judges made sounds of surprise. No? Lord Castellan raised an eyebrow, but he didn't look angry. If anything, he looked intrigued. I don't want wealth, Amara said, her voice growing stronger. I don't want power over others. I just want a home, a real one, a place where I can help people without being destroyed for it. She held up the wooden carving. You taught me something in those days at the mill. You said worth isn't measured in gold. If I take everything you're offering, won't I become like them? She gestured to where Marcos had stood. Won't wealth change me too? Lord Castellan smiled then, truly smiled. Wrong answer, he said, and exactly the right one. Amara blinked, confused. If you'd accepted immediately, Lord Castellan explained, you would have failed the final test. Greed wears many masks, including the mask of opportunity. He took the documents back from the clerk. But you asked for only what you need, not what you could take. That's wisdom. He gestured again, and different documents appeared, smaller, simpler. Therefore, I grant you guardianship of the river lands around Riverside Village. Not the entire fortune, but enough. A home with dignity, land to farm or not as you choose, and a title, River Keeper. Your responsibility will be to ensure the water stays clean, the bank stays strong, and those who walk the land are treated fairly. He paused, then added, it comes with a salary. Modest, but enough to live on comfortably. You'll never be hungry again, Amara. You'll never be homeless again. But you also won't be so wealthy that gold corrupts what made you worthy in the first place. Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks, the first tears she'd allowed herself throughout this entire ordeal. Thank you, she whispered. No, Lord Castellan replied. Thank you. You reminded me that goodness still exists. That was worth more than all my wealth combined. The judges smiled, actual, genuine smiles. Even in a court of cold justice, warmth could bloom. There's one more thing, Lord Castellan said. He reached into his coat and pulled out the simple shawl Amara had wrapped him in during the storm. Somehow, he'd kept it, cleaned and mended. Your first covering, he said, draping it over her shoulders. Never forget what you did when you had nothing. That's who you truly are. From the shadows of the hall, the forest elder watched silently. She nodded once, satisfied, then vanished like smoke. The journey back to Riverside Village was different than the journey to the capital. Amara rode in a carriage, not a prisoner's cart, but a proper coach with cushions and windows that opened to let in spring air. Official papers in her bag declared her the river keeper, bearing Lord Castellan's seal and the court's approval. Word traveled faster than horses. By the time Amara's carriage reached the village, everyone had heard. The homeless girl was homeless no more. The accused thief was actually a hero. The worthless one had worth beyond measure. The entire village stood in the square, waiting. When Amara stepped down from the carriage, there was a moment of frozen silence. Then, one by one, people knelt. Grandmother Yemi first, her old knees creaking, but her face full of joy. Then the farmer who gave her vegetables, then the shopkeepers, the laborers, the children who threw stones. Even the village guards knelt, their faces showing shame for having arrested her. "Forgive us," Grandmother Yemi said, her voice cracking. "We were blind. We were cruel. We chose lies over truth because lies were easier." Amara stood before them, these people who had known her all her life, who'd fed her sometimes and ignored her often, who turned on her at the first whisper of scandal. She felt anger. Of course she did. The wounds were too fresh not to hurt. But she also felt something else. Understanding. They were human, flawed and frightened and easily swayed, just like everyone, just like she might have been in different circumstances. "Stand up," she said quietly. "All of you, stand up." They rose slowly, afraid of what judgment might come next. Amara looked at each face, seeing the fear and hope mixed together. What happened hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. Some people flinched. But I also understand. Fear makes people cruel. Uncertainty makes them grab onto simple stories, even false ones. She took a breath. "I forgive you." Relief flooded faces like sunrise over hills. Some people wept. However, Amara's voice grew firmer. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. What happened showed me who you are when tested. I'll remember that, not with bitterness, but with clarity." She looked at Grandmother Yemi, who nodded with understanding and respect. "I'm river keeper now," Amara said. "That means I serve this village, manage the lands, ensure fairness. I'll do that job well because it's right, not because you deserve it, but I won't pretend we're the same as we were before. We can't be." It was mercy without weakness, forgiveness with boundaries. The village would have to earn back trust, not simply receive it. "Some of you helped me when you could," Amara said, her voice softening. "The farmer who gave vegetables, the woman who left bread on the mill steps when she thought no one saw, the child who shared water once. I remember those kindnesses, both the good and the bad. I remember." The farmer who gave vegetables straightened, pride and relief on his weathered face. "We build forward from here," Amara said. "The past is recorded, the river remembers, as Grandmother Yeni taught me. But the future is unwritten. Show me who you want to be now." That evening, a new house stood at the river's edge, built by Lord Castellan's workers in anticipation of Amara's return. Not a mansion, but a real home with strong walls and windows that caught sunrise. Amara stood at those windows, looking at the river. Its surface reflected stars, infinite and beautiful. She held the wooden carving, tracing its 3 rivers flowing into one. Behind her, the village settled into night, forever changed. Years passed, though our story ends here, at the moment of transformation when everything changes yet everything essential remains the same. The river still flows, patient and eternal. It still remembers everything that happens along its banks, the kindnesses and cruelties, the truths and lies, the courage and cowardice. Water forgets nothing. Amara became legendary in that region. Stories of the river keeper spread, how she managed lands with fairness, how she helped the poor without enabling laziness, how she confronted the powerful without cruelty, how she remembered both good and bad, but built for the future rather than dwelling in past hurts. Lord Castellan visited sometimes, an old man at peace with his choices. They'd sit by the river and talk about the nature of worth.
About how the truest test of character comes not in grand moments, but in small ones, when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when helping is hard. Marcus and Helena served their sentences. Whether they learned anything, whether their characters changed, that's another story. Some people transform through consequence, others simply endure it. But this story isn't really about them. It's about a girl who had nothing and gave everything. About how kindness given in darkness shines brightest of all. About how what we do when we think no one important is watching reveals our truest selves. Listen carefully now. For this is the wisdom the river whispers to those who pay attention. Kindness given in secret weighs more than gold shouted in public. What you do when no reward exists reveals what you truly are. And the world, like the river, remembers everything, waiting patiently to repay both cruelty and compassion in measures beyond imagination. Now I ask you, friend, as the old stories always have, if you were Amara, would you have pulled a dying stranger from the storm? What lesson does this story teach your heart? The river is always listening.